For 2 decades, Miller Lite reigned as America's light beer king, built on a simple slogan and a roster of legends. But in the mid-1990s, a bizarre $50 million ad gamble changed everything, costing them the #2 spot and billions in sales. Why would an unstoppable brand bet its future on absurdist commercials, and how did the campaign go so disastrously wrong? The real lesson is hidden in Miller Lite's fall. In 1975, Miller Lite did not just launch a new beer, it created an entirely new category. Light beer was a punchline before Miller's campaign hit the airwaves. The solution was radical for its time. Take the country's most respected athletes, put them in a bar, and let them argue about beer. Dick Butkus, John Madden, and Bob Uecker were not just endorsers, they were the faces of a movement that made light beer not only acceptable, but cool. The ads were simple and direct. One side shouted, "Tastes great." The other fired back, "Less filling." The debate was staged, but the camaraderie felt real. Ordinary guys saw their sports heroes trading jokes and raising glasses. Suddenly, drinking a light beer did not mean sacrificing masculinity or fun. The formula worked. By the early 1990s, Miller Lite claimed a 10% share of the entire beer market, holding steady as America's #2 beer. The campaign itself landed in the top 10 of all-time advertising lists, outlasting trends and copycats for 20 years. The tagline, "Tastes great, less filling," became as familiar as any jingle on television. Every commercial reinforced the same message: you could have flavor and fewer calories without giving up your seat at the bar. For 20 years, Miller Lite's playbook was clear, and the results spoke for themselves. The brand's rise was not about gimmicks or shock value. It was about trust and consistency, and a message that never tried to be anything it was not. By 1995, the beer aisle had turned into a battleground. Budweiser's new campaign was everywhere. 3 frogs croaking Budweiser in a swamp, simple and strange, but impossible to forget. The frogs were not just a hit, they became a pop culture event, plastered on everything from t-shirts to late-night talk shows. Bud Light doubled down with humor that belonged more on MTV than in a traditional beer ad, trading old-school charm for surreal jokes and talking animals. Coors Light piled on with icy-cold imagery and relentless promotions, fighting for the same young drinkers. The rules of beer advertising shifted almost overnight. Quirky, offbeat, and sometimes outright bizarre, the new commercials captured the attention of a generation raised on channel surfing and irony. Suddenly, the classic playbook, sports legends, barroom banter, and straight talk felt like yesterday's news. Miller Lite's once comfortable spot at #2 started to look shaky. Market share numbers began to slip, and whispers in boardrooms grew louder. The competition was not just catching up, they were rewriting the script. Inside Miller's headquarters, pressure mounted. The world had changed, and the old formula seemed less certain by the day. Sticking with tradition now looked risky, not safe. The message was clear: adapt or get left behind. For Miller's strategists, the question was not whether to respond, but how far to go. The industry's new logic was simple: if weird works, go weirder. On January 12, 1997, Miller Lite unveiled its answer to the beer ad revolution, an all-out creative spectacle that left little to tradition. The new campaign did not just introduce a slogan or a celebrity, it introduced a character named Dick, a fictional creative genius presented in a deliberately awkward 1970s yearbook photo. The idea came from the minds at Fallon McElligott, and it was brought to life by Gerald Casale, the director known for Devo's most eccentric music videos. The ambition was staggering. Miller committed $250 million over 2 years, enough to buy Super Bowl time and then some. The campaign rolled out with more than 80 different commercials, each one stranger than the last. There was the evil beaver, a giant rodent rampaging through a frontier town. There was the naked man, wandering the countryside with only a Miller Lite logo for modesty. Cowboys crooned "Adios amigo" to bottles of beer walking into a bathroom. There were Elvis-like Cupid, Twist to Open Guy, and Jimmy the product tester. The ads started innocuous and then descended into full David Lynch-style surrealism, increasingly divorced from any clear reason to buy beer. The commercials never mentioned taste, calories, or why anyone should pick up a Miller Lite. Instead, they leaned into surreal humor and visual gags, banking on the idea that if Budweiser's frogs could sell beer, this weird universe could do it bigger. The bet was simple: out-weird the competition, capture a new generation, and make Miller Lite the talk of every living room in America. All that stood in the way was whether drinkers would actually play along. Focus groups sat in silence as Dick's commercials rolled. Where previous Miller Lite ads sparked laughter and debate, these left viewers speechless. When asked what the ads meant, most could not say. Some scribbled notes like weird, confusing, or simply, what does this have to do with beer? The feedback was consistent across cities and age groups. Nobody understood what Miller Lite was trying to sell. Confusion did not stop with consumers. Distributors, the people responsible for getting Miller Lite onto shelves and into bars, were furious. Many had built their businesses on the strength of the old campaign. Now they faced a barrage of complaints from retailers and bar owners who could not make sense of the new ads. At industry conventions, Miller's sales team was met with open hostility. Wholesalers demanded answers. Some threatened to pull back on Miller Lite promotions entirely. The support that once helped Miller dominate the market evaporated almost overnight. Weekly sales reports told the rest of the story. Despite the $250 million spent on airtime and production, Miller Lite's numbers refused to budge. Shipments stalled. Market share, already slipping, showed no sign of recovery. Competitors circled, eager to fill the gap. Internally, frustration boiled over as creative awards piled up, but cases of beer did not move. The disconnect was impossible to ignore. Miller had traded clarity for chaos, and the people closest to the customer, the distributors, were the first to feel the fallout. The writing was on the wall. A campaign built on shock and spectacle had lost the plot, and the cost was not just measured in dollars. It was measured in lost trust, lost shelf space, and a brand drifting further from the drinkers who once made it great. 8 days after taking the reins at Miller, Jack Rooney called time on the Dick campaign. The decision landed fast and without ceremony. Executives gathered, and Rooney's verdict was blunt. He said, "Our advertising is not world-class." The agency behind the campaign, Fallon McElligott, was out. The commercials vanished from the airwaves almost overnight. For distributors and longtime employees, relief mixed with a sense of defeat. Miller Lite's market share had dropped to 7.7% by 2002, down from the double digits that once seemed untouchable. The brand that had invented light beer now scrambled to recover lost ground. In the span of 2 years, a $250 million gamble ended not with a bang, but with a quiet retreat and a permanent loss of standing in the beer aisle. Miller Lite's roadback was long and humbling. It was not until 2014 that the brand found real footing again, dusting off its original 1975 packaging and betting on nostalgia to win back old fans. The lesson was hard-earned. Abandoning decades of clear, benefit-driven messaging for the sake of trend-chasing cost far more than any creative award could ever justify. 5 errors define the downfall: throwing out a proven identity, confusing the audience, alienating the sales force, copying rivals instead of leading, and forgetting to connect ads to the product. The industry cheered the campaign's creativity, but Miller Lite learned the hard way that you cannot deposit trophies in the bank. Real recovery meant returning to what worked and never letting the basics slip again. Today, Miller Lite remains a cautionary tale. Even $250 million cannot buy back lost identity. In a market obsessed with reinvention, brands still gamble relevance for noise. Creative risks make headlines, but only clarity earns loyalty. In the end, confusion is always more expensive than playing it safe.